This is Lady Boulay, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your thumbs up, for your comments, and thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for all you do to support the channel. Today's discussion has a bad and a good element. The bad came first, but good came out of that. A tragedy occurred on April the 4th in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when Patrick Lyoya, a 26-year-old Congolese immigrant, was gunned down by an officer of the Grand Rapids Police Department. This is a tragedy that African Americans are familiar with, and the shock and grief following this kind of tragedy is overwhelming. I'm sure that it's overwhelming, and it's overwhelming on every level, at the parents' level, at the children's level, at the siblings, family, and friends. It's overwhelming. To add to that devastation is the fact that Patrick Lyoya's family, Congolese immigrants, had a language barrier. Not only was there a language barrier, but they also experienced a kind of indifference by the Grand Rapids Police Department, as if it was no big deal. They didn't take it seriously that one of their officers had gunned down a young man in broad open daylight over a minor traffic stop. On top of that, the father said he was informed about what had happened to his son through a telephone call. They didn't even come to the house and talk to the parents or say anything. They called him on the phone and told him that his son had been killed. 4 days later, Mr. Lyoya still had not seen his son's body. And you can imagine the grief of a father whose oldest son has been stricken down like this. English is his third language. Swahili is his first language. He speaks French, and then he's learned English in the last 10 years. So he's got to filter this tragedy through 3 languages. You can only imagine it, African immigrants coming here expecting a better life for themselves and for their children, having left a civil war back home in the Congo, only to come here and find that this kind of thing can happen to your child, and it can be treated with almost complete indifference. Like Patrick Lyoya's life didn't matter. So that's why we say Black Lives Matter. Even if that organization was trash, the concept was correct. Black Lives Matter. The Lyoya family are members of the Buffalo tribe, and I'm sure I didn't get that right. And one young woman from the tribe spoke at his funeral, and she said, "Mama and Papa Lyoya came to this country with an assurance, a promise, that they and their children would not be presented with turmoil and death. The very foundation of what makes America, America, it was broken when Patrick Lyoya was killed in the street." Well, this was broken way before Patrick Lyoya was killed. I know they come here with these grand expectations, but when they come here, they have to reconcile themselves to what America really is. America can be a wonderful place to live, but America is not perfect. And the mistake that so many immigrants make is thinking that America was tailor-made for their dreams and or fantasies. But she was right in that what they thought America was broken when Patrick Lyoya was killed. It might be the job of American diplomats, politicians, and missionaries to present the American ideal, the American dream, to the public, including the international public and people who would like to come here. That's their job. But the job of the average American police officer, regardless to his race, is not to reinforce the American dream, but to make a living for his family. And the average American police department is going to protect that officer, even when he makes a mistake or when he makes a bad call. So that is what you're going to come up against if, for whatever reason, there is an interaction with an American police officer and that interaction goes bad. Unfortunately, African immigrants to the United States do seem to think that they're exempt or that they're insulated from these incidents. Patrick Lyoya's father, Mr. Peter Lyoya, said that he never was concerned about any kind of police brutality towards his son. Now, he's been living in the United States for a few years, and he has seen George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other tragedies that have happened to African Americans. But he didn't fear for his children because he's an immigrant. They're good immigrants. And therein, I believe, is why so many African immigrants tell their children to stay away from Black Americans, because I think that they think that as long as they don't associate with Black Americans, don't have anything to do with Black Americans, go to school, get good grades, be good citizens, bow and curtsy, and be very good model minorities, you can escape the horrible things that happen to those Black Americans. And you can believe that until something happens to you. This is also telling. At Patrick Lyoya's funeral, a Kenyan interpreter said, "Many of us refugees and immigrants, we came to America for safety, and you took it away." She detailed how, in her experience, it seemed that when police hear African accents, they assume there will be few consequences for violating the Africans' rights. Beyond the racism that we face, she said, we also face other barriers. And then she went on to say, Africans, we are people who want peace. We want just to be able to provide for our families, go to school, work hard, become executives, do the best things we can for this city, she said. We are here, we are staying, and we need to be factored into everything that you plan to do. We don't need to wait for another tragedy to happen so that you can hear us. If she would have a conversation with an African American, they would express the same wishes and dreams for their own children and for their own communities. That is what we all want. Somewhere to live and be safe and be free to work and take care of our families and really not cause any problems. African Americans are the best citizens in the United States and have always been. The Africans don't really see us as connected, and we are. And it's really important that they see us as being connected, because as long as they stay isolated and feel isolated, things are going to happen, and they are going to get swept under the rug. Patrick Lyoya's father told an interpreter that he thought that Patrick's death would have been swept under the rug if the community had not come together and supported them. They thought because he was an African immigrant that those loudmouth, flame-throwing African Americans were not going to get involved in it, but they were wrong. And that's the good part that I want to get to. At least 4 days after his death, Patrick Lyoya's family had not been able to see his body. The event was captured on video. So at the next city council meeting, members of Patrick Lyoya's community flooded that meeting. It was a large crowd of supporters, African immigrants. They have a very close-knit community and they support each other. There were white community members and also several African Americans, and they made their feelings known. In fact, they shut that meeting down. African immigrants apparently think that it's about their status as immigrants, but African Americans broke it down differently and said, this ain't about you being no immigrant. This is about you being black. That's how the Black Americans interpreted the whole thing, because that's what it is. So the Black American community was involved in this at the very beginning. Apparently he lived among African Americans. They saw what happened. And I'm just going to make a guess that he was probably a pretty decent guy, because I saw Black Americans passing that coffin. I did watch the funeral on TV. It was live streamed. And I saw several African American men viewing that body and doing that little thing that they do on their chest. And that brotherhood type thing, I guess. But they were there. So they were involved at the very beginning. Now, what is happening with this family before the funeral, they could not get any information from the police department. Robert Womack is a county commissioner for Kent County, Michigan, which is the county that Patrick Lyoya lived in. And when he learned that 4 days had passed and the Lyoya family had not been able to see Patrick's body, he called Ben Crump. And we know that once Ben Crump gets in it, it's going to become national news. And usually, following Ben Crump is Reverend Al Sharpton, whether you like him or not. He knows how to stir things up and bring national and international attention to a matter. So that's what it took for this to become a national story and for the Lyoya family to get some answers. Patrick Lyoya's funeral was held at the Renaissance Church of God in Christ, which is a black congregation in Grand Rapids. It was a big-time funeral. Over 500 people attended. Several officials spoke, and that let you know that something important had taken place. Ben Crump spoke, and then Reverend Sharpton delivered the eulogy. Reverend Sharpton took them back to slavery, as he always does, and as he should, because that's when it all began. Took them back to slavery and gave a fiery message on the American justice system. Reverend Sharpton had a unifying message. He acknowledged that some of us had been here longer than others, but whether Black American or Congolese-American, we are united in the things that can happen to us because we're Black. And I'll just throw this in. We have more in common with Congolese-Americans than that, because some of our ancestors actually came from the Congo. And Reverend Sharpton, not one to miss an opportunity, once he had the crowd all stirred up, demanded that the Grand Rapids Police Department release the name of the officer that killed Patrick Lyoya. Now, before Crump and Sharpton got involved, the Grand Rapids Police Department was vague in their communications with the community and with the family, saying something to the effect that the investigation into the shooting continues and no timeline for its conclusion exists. In other words, we ain't in no hurry, and we'll let you know when we let you know. But they hadn't counted on any support from the African American community, because these are African immigrants and they see themselves as separate, and to a certain extent African Americans see ourselves as separate. But when something like this happens, this is not time to do a whole lot of bickering. The same thing that can happen to them can happen to us. And we really need to step up for each other. That doesn't mean that we're going to fall in love with each other and be in each other's faces all the time. It takes time to build relationships. It takes time to build sustainable relationships. But you have to start somewhere. And this is a good place to start. Recognizing that what can happen to us can happen to them, and what can happen to them can happen to us. It's just common sense. And I think in this particular case, these two communities came together, realizing that this is a time that we can help, or in the case of African Americans, this is a time that we can help. This family has got to heal, and with Ben Crump involved, we can almost be assured that this family is going to get paid, because what happened to him over a traffic stop was just completely unnecessary, but it was tragic. This family is in so much pain. You can see that. And nothing that's done is going to bring him back. But doggone it, they should have to pay for what that officer did. And we can keep them lifted up in prayer. There were a few observations that I made during this tragedy that I will share. Number one, it appears that Patrick Lyoya was a decent human being. He had a job. He worked as an auto parts factory worker, and his passions included teaching young people traditional Congolese dance. So far, no one has uncovered any social media posts where he's been bashing women and African Americans. That's number one. Number two, I did watch the funeral, and we're similar in how we grieve our dad. One of the most touching parts of the service was a Congolese musical group composed a song in Swahili. It was kind of a rap song, but it was appropriate to the occasion, and it was very moving. And it showed something else that we have in common. We have that musical ability. As you would expect, there was an outpouring of grief at the funeral, and even at the cemetery, when the mother was crying and didn't want to leave her son there in the cold ground by himself. I witnessed similar grief recently at a funeral that I went to. So we do have some similarities. When something like this happens, you're limited in what you can do. You can't do what people really want done, which is to bring back their loved one. But you can do the next best thing in supporting and embracing the family in their grief and showing that you care. I am proud of the African American community of Grand Rapids for standing up in a meaningful way and supporting the Lyoya family in their time of grief. And I'm not trying to diminish what anybody else did, because as I said before, the African immigrants are a strong community and they support each other, and the white community supported them as well. But I'm speaking on my community, the African American community, and I'm very proud of how they responded to the needs of that family. And I hope that we can see more of this, not in tragedy, but just in everyday going about, because African immigrants face challenges that we don't even think about, and that's what the Kenyan lady spoke about. They have the language barrier, but there are other challenges. What happened to Patrick Lyoya was a tragedy, and an unnecessary tragedy, as so many of these things are. But African Americans were able to do what we do best, to help each other in the time of need. I am so glad that the African American community of Grand Rapids, Michigan, stood up and did what they were supposed to do for this family. So thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share the video, and as always, have a great day.